Welcome to Empowerment Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Friedemann Schaub, and I think today we have a show that has been striking the nerve of quite a few people, I have to say. Usually I'm sending out a newsletter right before the show, and I don't think that there was ever a newsletter that had such a huge response than the one I just submitted. And I want to thank all those people that have been emailing back to me, those that agreed and were happy that certain things got pointed out, and also those that were not so content with what I was writing and rather said my points of views are ridiculous. But that's why the show is here to give you and me a voice about different topics, a voice about maybe problems and solutions that we all are dealing with, but are not necessarily agreeing with. Because today the topic is something that I believe has been really in the forefront of the mind, at least of my mind, when we are looking at all these interesting and strange and somehow also disturbing developments of the last few weeks. There is the manipulation by men in power, just like Harvey Weinstein or Kevin Spacey, who just seem to harass men and women as if they are disposable objects. And they were able to keep those people that they were abusing quiet for years. And then there is the manipulation by the media, who seems to just randomly delete or distort facts and hype up whatever increases their ratings, and then they're omitting stories that their audience doesn't really want to hear. And then there is, of course, the manipulation by politicians, which, on a national and on a global level, I think is the most dangerous of all of those manipulations. So today the show is about manipulation, especially mass manipulation, and what we can learn from the past, from history. And since I am from Germany and I have learned since early in my life a lot about the dark past of Germany and how mass manipulation has really made this possible. The atrocious crimes, the horrible genocides, and Second World War, and you name it. I mean, I think the Third Reich, the era of Hitler, stands for many as one of the most horrible times of human history. And it all started with the power of this manipulation of people that, if they would have known what happened, if they would have known what this power of manipulation can do, may have chosen differently, or may have chosen to stand up against this man that seduced these people. And unfortunately, relatives of mine were amongst those. Seduced the people to believe that he is their Führer, that he is the leader that brings their country to the promised land, to the place where there is only joy, happiness, and well-being for the chosen ones. Now, today I want to talk about mass manipulation because I believe we are in a time where there are certain signs and there are certain tendencies that I believe are disconcerting. Now, I want to point out this is not a political program. And I don't want to increase the divisiveness that our country is already struggling with. What this program is about is just to gain more awareness. It's ultimately about empowerment. It's about for us to be able to take responsibility for our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, and this way become more self-reliant. This is not about bashing the parties or the president. It's more about understanding that we as the electorates need to be aware of when we get manipulated, when the politicians, the media, the pundits try to basically shift our thinking without us even knowing. When they try to cloud our judgment and this way get into positions of power without us really seeing the bigger picture, without us having really the ability to make critical choices. So even if you don't really agree with some of my observations and thoughts, I do believe that you agree with the simple fact that when we are triggered to be scared or angry or disgusted, we're not making the most rational or well-informed choices. I think our emotions are really valuable passengers, but it needs to be our rational mind who holds on to the steering wheel of our life. Manipulation is exactly doing the opposite. Manipulation is trying to bypass our intellect, our rational mind, and is trying to control us and trying to basically take advantage in often unfair and dishonest way. And this is exactly what I believe has been happening recently, and this is where we need to look back into the past and learn from what has happened there. Now, when you look at politics right now, I think many of you would also say, well, I'm kind of sick and tired of it. And I don't really like how I'm always getting riled up. I'm always feeling either anxious or I'm feeling scared or I'm feeling frightened or frustrated or irritated or whatever it is. And when you look at politics, there's also this trend right now to rather shoot from the hip at each other than really to do that what the founding fathers have described as to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So when you think about what happens right now, this is not only in America, this is happening all over the world. And what concerns me is just this general resurgence of populism and nationalistic tendencies. And I think similar to the rise of Hitler, politicians are preying more on the worries and fears and the anger of people who are looking for someone to make their lives better and safer again. And unfortunately, the truth is that often we are in the midst of feeling these basic emotions, anxious, angry, disgusted. We are losing touch with our basic values, the values of decency, honesty, compassion, kindness, which usually unite a healthy society. Instead, when we are triggered to feel these very visceral emotions that are all about survival, we gravitate more towards those patterns that seem to ensure survival, such as the rigid tribal consciousness, which is then all about rejecting those who are different and following the strongest and loudest of the leaders. So we are losing touch with that, what ultimately I believe the founding fathers have envisioned for us. So if you have also felt somewhat played by the media and politicians, if you feel manipulated, if you feel confused, or if you also notice that somehow something is shifting in our society, maybe people seem to be more, harsh to each other, speaking more from a place of irritation and frustration, being less tolerant, or if you notice also in your family a certain kind of divisiveness, if you feel that there is something happening that we need to pay attention to, call and just share your observations. 888-418-6890. Again, 888-418-6890. And also, if you have found that in the midst of all this confusion and in the midst of all that, maybe also manipulation that we could get bombarded to if we're spending too much time in front of the TV, you were able to keep your sanity. You were able to stay calm, centered, what did you do? And what kind of tips would you want to share with the listeners on how to just stay calm and centered and not lose yourself, not lose touch with your values? Again, 888-418-6890, or you can also use the instant messaging board on the Transformation Talk Radio website. Now, I'm German, and some of you may have obviously heard it in my accent. Actually, recently, someone on YouTube wrote a comment to one of my guided meditations there on my YouTube channel and said, "Oh, I'm feeling I'm hypnotized by Arnie," and I'm sure he meant Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I'm not sure if my accent is as thick, but okay, I can't deny it. I'm German, and I grew up in Germany. And as I said before, early on in my life, we were taught thoroughly and I believe also very necessarily the history of Germany, and especially the history of the Third Reich. And when we come back, I will share more with you about that history and the tactics of the Nazis and what they were using to manipulate their folk, and how those tactics seem shockingly similar to what has been going on in politics today. So stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. We are talking about mass manipulation. It's hard to say. Sometimes I'm stumbling over it. So mass manipulation, and how the media and politics are taking advantage of certain tactics that may have been already used by the Nazis in Germany. As I said, growing up in Germany, I certainly have learned a lot about that part of the history, but nothing really prepared me. No pictures or films or teachers telling you about what happened in the Holocaust. Nothing prepared me to being in a concentration camp and seeing it much more in front of you. It was, I think, one of my, maybe most horrific experiences, simply because it all of a sudden was even more real than when you just read about it or see something on in an image or in a film. So this was in a concentration camp in Austria called Mauthausen. And when my parents and my sister and I went there, I was pretty young. It was striking me how horribly degrading and dehumanizing the Nazis were treating completely innocent people. I'll never forget the eerie laboratories where the most cruel experiments were done on people about hyperthermia and wound healing and so on. Can't forget the gas chambers that were disguised as communal shower facilities, and also these ovens, these crematory ovens, which really still had the stench of smoke and ashes. And then thinking about that, this is actually the smell of people being burned there. That still gives me a shiver, and I'm still just really shocked and also ashamed for what the Germans did. And at that time, we were actually, as a family, so shocked and ashamed and felt so guilty, even though neither my parents nor I had done anything at that time, that we spoke English. We couldn't really admit that we were Germans because we felt so bad. Now, later on, I asked my parents, so how is that possible? How is it possible that something like this could happen, that somehow Germans didn't really, as one people, stand up against this incredible cruelty and this incredible injustice, and how could they follow this little tiny Austrian guys in the first place? Well, my parents said they were teenagers at that time, and all that they could share was that Basically, Germans were desperate for a change, still somehow reeling from the aftermath of World War I and the Versailles Peace Treaty. There was somehow a hope that Hitler would make Germany great again, that somehow he would lift them up to a greater sense of confidence and a greater prosperity that they hadn't experienced since a long time. And so whatever he said, they believed. Now, Hitler wrote in his book Mein Kampf some of his tactics and ideas on how to control a nation, and I think they are quite telling and chilling when you are listening to them. So here are a few. So Hitler wrote, "The broad masses of a population are more amenable to the appeal of rhetoric than to any other force. Make a lie big. Make a lie simple. Keep saying it, and eventually the people will believe it. It's not the truth that matters. What matters is victory. The art of leadership consists in consolidating the attention of the people against a single adversary and taking care that nothing will split up that attention." He also said, "I use emotion for the masses and reserve reason for the few. What good fortune for governments that people do not think." And to top it off, he said, "Humanitarianism is the expression of stupidity and cowardice. Strength lies not in defense, but in attack." Now, all of those things, when you listen to them, sound eerily familiar, and maybe also they sound like, well, there are still people that are using this concept of just prying on emotions and distorting the truth and basically assuming that people are not thinking, but people want to feel good. And this is exactly what Hitler did. He discounted the press by calling the press lying news, Lügenpresse. And he focused the people's attention to that one common enemy that needed to be defeated. And he made people feel good. He gave them work. He invested a lot in the infrastructure. He gave huge tax breaks and boosted the national pride. And that is a very important fact, that in Germany, everyone seemed to be more taken care of with Hitler. Everyone seemed to somehow feel like, well, he's almost like a father figure who's going to figure it all out and who will make it all well and make sure that we have food on the table and that we are safe. And since that felt so good, he almost appeared like the Messiah, like a Superman. They were willing to simply ignore the fact that there were a lot of horrible things going on already during his rise. There were gross inhumanities. He was depleting the country's finances and also, more obviously, prepared for war. But I think that fact that people just felt like, well, he is really so good to us, made them also turn a blind eye on his obvious obsession with anti-Semitism. And so they basically felt, well, the good that he's delivering is outweighing the bad. And this is, I believe, something we just have to be really aware of, that we do lose our humanity sometimes just for the wrong reason. We lose it in those moments when we feel either under distress, when we feel anxious, and when we feel that we are in imminent danger, or we lose it when we feel a sense of gratitude or a sense of someone has been rescuing, saving us, and so we let those people often much more off the hook than we are really staying in a very committed and also in a critical way connected to that what makes humans decent and good, which is compassion, which is care, which is kindness. Now, I believe that, of course, we cannot necessarily say that everything that happened there will happen again, and we can certainly not say that the mass manipulation that may be going on right now is exactly the mass manipulation of the Nazis, but there are similarities, and I just want to point out that we all need to be a little bit more vigilant and a little bit more aware of what happens when we are listening to politicians speaking, what happens when we are reading the news, what happens when we are just paying attention to the political messages, what happens inside of us, how do we feel, what emotions get triggered, and are those emotions ultimately taking away our common sense? Mass manipulation is something that I believe we need to understand and see the signs of as they are happening. And so I want to make it quite simple and just talk about the 4-step process of mass manipulation and why we are more susceptible. And 2 reasons why we are more susceptible. One is that there is a general information overload. There are studies that say that we are now dealing with about 5 times more information on all different levels, but also information on a political level than 30 years ago. Since our brain is not 5 times bigger or more capable of processing this information, we in general feel overwhelmed. And that overwhelm makes it also harder for us to feel like empowered to make good choices because we just don't know how to compute all these different aspects and opinions and also pieces of information that are available to us. And the second one is that there is a certain anxiety in the world. The world seems to be just more scary, more unpredictable, more overwhelming. There seem to be more threats from all different angles, new ones and old ones, and that brings up that feeling of imminent danger, and that brings up the feeling of not being safe and looking for someone who can make you feel more safe. Tied into that is also a certain kind of anger, the anger the anger at the inequality and the injustice that some people seem to be forgotten. Some people seem to have been ignored throughout the last decades. Some people feel that this inequality is to be blamed by the government, and that there is something that they need to rise up to make a change, which I completely understand. And then there is still the fact that somehow deep inside, there is still in this country racism and sexism alive and well. And all of this together creates a fertile ground for this 4-step manipulation process that I will share after the break. And it's important for us to really be aware of this process, because each of those steps have the power to basically shift our thinking in the way the politicians or the media wants us to think, and away from that, what we may really, as maybe at the core level of our beliefs and our values, are thinking. So when we come back, we'll talk about this 4-step manipulation process and what you want to watch out for when it actually happens. And even more importantly, what can you do to avoid being manipulated? How can you not fall prey to the false messages or those that want to just push your emotions and this way push you to do whatever they want you to do? When we come back, we will talk more about all of that. So stay tuned.